So in this video, I'm going to talk about the Rlc-Eof function. Again, it's one of the 5 primary stress theories we'll talk about from a tissue healing and stress on tissue type of a theory. Specific adaptations to imposed demands is one of them. That big example I talk about there is a pitcher that's throwing and constantly goes into external rotation, gets actual torsion on their humerus. Physical stress theory, which we'll talk a little bit about here, gets into are you putting more stress to get hypertrophy, or are you putting less stress to get hypotrophy and or tissue potential death? And then also it talks about the 3 big components are: what is the magnitude of the stress, what is the direction of the stress, and what is the frequency or the timing of the stress. We're going to talk about Rlc-Eof function here, and from that standpoint, is from Scott Dye's work, talking about mostly, like in his article, he talks about it from a standpoint of tissue homeostasis as it relates to the knee specifically, but you can take this concept and apply it across the board to different tissues, and actually from a concept of holistically, kind of like allostatic load on an overall human and or from what dynamical systems theory would call an organism. You can apply that across the board, and we'll give some different examples here. So this is the graph that he kind of plotted out, and on the x-axis he has frequency, so how frequent is the load coming on, and then the load is on the vertical axis. So for example, and these are just arbitrary numbers, but this could be days of the week, and this could be arbitrary numbers on the amount of load, but let's just say they're arbitrary numbers at this point. And so if you have a frequency of 3 and you have a load of 1, that would put this particular person and that tissue in the zone of homeostasis, which means it's the load that's on that tissue that many times is not hypertrophying the tissue, it's not hypertrophy of it's not minimizing the tissue, it's not too little of too little of load. It's kind of a load that's not either going to increase it or decrease its capability. Versus if I go to 4 of a frequency and I stay at 1, that will now get me into the zone of progressive overload. But this is where you're actually going to start getting hypertrophy, start getting increased load, start getting where the tissue is actually growing and able to handle and tolerate increases in load. So it's this combination of frequency and the amount of load that gets you either into underloaded area. So if it was 1 and 1, that's pretty much you're not loading the tissue enough, and so that's when you're going to get the tissue is going to get weaker and those types of things, and atrophy and that type of stuff. So you want to get into the zone of overload, but you don't want to get to where it's excessive and you get tissue injury. So for example, of a 6 and a 2, that would that combination of frequency and load in this particular case would get you into excessive, and that's when people get injured and so forth. So this is the overall big construct, and I'll give some examples here. And so typically, if you look at physical stress theory, remember physical stress theory talks about the magnitude of the load, direction, and the timing of the load. So if you have a one-time event, so the frequency is 1 time, but the load is at a maximum in this case, that's in this case the soccer player, this other player falls into him, this huge valgus stress, it's really quick, so the magnitude is really high, the direction is in a bad direction, and the timing is very quick. That leads to a macrotraumatic injury. So this large magnitude of an injury. So high magnitude, very quick, one-time event, that would be a macrotraumatic episode. That the issue there is the magnitude of the load. It only happened 1 time, so it's only one level, one number of frequency, but the magnitude is the issue. Versus, let's say we get a different situation. So we have a runner here. So they're running like for 5Ks or whatever. And so I'll put some context to these arbitrary numbers. So let's say this is the days of the week. So these 7 days a week, and let's say these are miles. Okay, 1 mile, 2 mile, 3 miles. So let's say this athlete is running 5 days a week, and each day of the week they're running 2 miles. So they're running 10 miles per week. For this particular person, that puts them in the zone of overload, where they're building tissue, they're building capacity, they're getting stronger, those types of things. If they only ran 1 time per week and 2 miles, that would keep them in homeostasis. And they wouldn't really get atrophied, they wouldn't get hypertrophied, they really wouldn't get any better. But now let's say they go to, hey, you know what, I want to build up my capacity, I'm going to go 7 days a week, I'm going to run every day, but I'm going to keep it at 2 miles per week, and I don't want to overdo it. So they went from 5 times per week to 7 times per week. Well, in this particular case, that puts that person into excessive overload and or injury. But now the issue is micro trauma. So this was a macrotraumatic episode based on magnitude of the load. This is a micro trauma injury based on the frequency of the load. So the load didn't change. The load's not very high. The magnitude's not very high. It's just that they're doing it with more frequency and or high frequency. So do I have a macrotraumatic episode, a load problem, a magnitude of load problem, or do I have a frequency of load problem? And because if you know which one of these it is or what combination it is, that will be how you address and treat that individual. So again, this is the envelope of function, but I'm superimposing the physical stress theory, which is magnitude of the load, which is high here, the timing of the load, which is quick here, and the direction of the stress. And so in this case, you have high magnitude, short time, and in this case, you have low magnitude, but you have a high frequency. So you have a frequency problem here and a magnitude problem there, and that's why they're coming to see you. So let's use a couple of examples. So let's say, we're going to use the myth of Milo. So let's say, Milo's carrying a calf, and he wants to get progressive overload, and he wants to get stronger. So these are the same kind of. So in this case, we're going to go days of the week, how many times, and this is going to be representative of like 10 pounds, 20 pounds, 30 pounds, and 40 pounds, and 50 pounds. So in this case, 1 day per week, he is lifting a 20-pound calf. So in that case, for Milo in this case, that puts him in the zone of homeostasis. He's good to go, but carrying that magnitude of a calf just 1 time per week puts him pretty close to his limit and to where he's going to get into overload and get stronger. But if he stays with just 1 time per week carrying that 20-pound calf, he's not going to get stronger, and he's not going to progressively overload. So he decides, hey, you know what? I'm busy. I want to stay at 1 time per week, but I'm going to be a little bit crazy, and I'm going to double the weight of the calf. And so he goes to a 40-pound calf. And in this particular case, he doubled his magnitude, which is probably not a good idea. But in this case, he's safe relatively. But that puts him at the very kind of top of his progressive overload envelope, and very close to injury. And it's based on simply changing the magnitude of the load and no change in frequency. But now if he goes and does a 55-pound calf, staying at that 1 time per week, that is where he gets into excessive load and potential injury. And it's based on the magnitude. It's based on the weight of the calf, because he's not changing his frequency. His frequency is staying the same. The only variable that changed that got him in trouble was the magnitude of the load. And if we go, now let's look at frequency. So let's say, he says, maybe he gets up here and he goes, man, that's kind of a heavy calf. I still want to progressively overload, but maybe I'll change the frequency and I'll lower the weight again. So he goes back to his 20-pound calf, and he goes, between 2 and 3 days per week, depending on how busy he is and that kind of stuff. And that pushes him from the zone of homeostasis to progressive overload, but he can also kind of tell that, hey, that's not really getting me close to where I'm really pushing myself. So he's overloading himself, but he's not, he's very safe, but he also knows that he probably needs to push himself a little bit more. So he goes to 5 times per week. And he definitely notices it more, but he's still in this safe zone. He's still in the overloading zone. This is definitely harder. He definitely feels more taxed, at the end of the week, because he went from between 2 and 3 days a week to 5 days a week. So he went from 1 day per week to 2 to 3, went from homeostasis to overload, went from 2 to 3 to 5, and he stayed in overload, but he definitely noticed it more because he's kind of pushing his envelope a little bit. And he says, you know what, I kind of want to stay at that 20-pound calf, because he didn't really like this. It felt, the load felt heavy. He kind of felt, a bit more sore than usual, and it took him several days to recover. So he says, I'm going to stay with the calf, but, I think I need to push myself more. So he goes 7 days a week. And that's what gets him in trouble is now he stays, the magnitude didn't change, but the frequency changed. And so now he has a frequency problem over here because he went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 and was still good, and then kind of pushed the frequency and now has a overuse injury that is a micro trauma injury that gets him to come to see you because now it's a frequency problem versus here was a magnitude problem. The reason it's important to know this is because if you figure this out on your exam and you calculate this out with numbers and all this kind of stuff, is you can, how I'm going to treat this person is I might keep the magnitude the same, but or maybe even increase the magnitude to maybe, a 25-pound calf, but go down to, 5 days per week. And then that's going to get me more up in here, closer to where he's, he kind of felt it up here, but maybe the load isn't bothering him as much. So I want to see, is it a load sensitive person or is it a frequency problem? So this is why you want to know is, are they having problems over here? So again, I forgot to point this out, but it's color coded. So these are all silver. So this is a frequency. This is a frequency problem. These are all pink. And this is a magnitude problem. You want to figure out, do I have a magnitude problem? Do I need to lower the weight? Maybe I lower the weight in this case. Maybe I go down to 3 days per week, but I do it, 30-pound calf, but I do it twice a week, which is going to keep me safe here. And, or, is it, okay, it's a frequency problem. Do I go back to here within, he says, well, that's where I was before, and, I don't feel that. So then maybe, I increase, I go from a 20-pound calf to a 25 or 30. And so I lower the frequency, but increase the magnitude. And then you're and we'll talk about, well, how do you know which one of these to do, and how do you know if you're getting into here? So that, and then, some combination of that is, where you kind of adjust both of them. If he goes from, a 40-pound calf, and in the case, maybe he says, you know what, I do feel that, but, I want to do that more because I can't go, I can't go 5 days per week. So he says, you know what, I'm going to do that 40-pound calf. I'm going to do it twice a week. And that's what, so the magnitude is the same. The frequency changed. Now you have a frequency problem. All right. So what you might do in this case is adjust both things. So maybe one day, maybe you have a heavy day and a light day. So you have a heavy day where it's the 40-pound calf 1 day per week. The second day per week is only a 30-pound calf. So you're going to end up somewhere in, this split is going to end up somewhere in here. Or maybe you figure out it needs to be 40 pounds one time and 20 pounds the other, which is going to probably put him somewhere in here. And then we'll talk about how do you figure all that out. So, all right. So then let's say another example. So that's weightlifting. What about running and/or everybody's, the national pastime right now is pickleball. I don't even know if this is pickleball. I don't play pickleball. This looks more like badminton, but I digress. And so now let's say, okay, I'm going to play pickleball. I'm going to play it 1 day per week. I'm busy. I'm a PT student. MSK is really hard. Neuro is really hard. It's a tough semester. I'm going to play 1 day a week, blow off some steam, and imagine the ball is Dr. Raymond's head. And so, is it a ball? I don't even know what it is. And so I'm going to play 1 day per week. And that day, I'm I'm going to play 2 matches. So I'm going to play a match, maybe I sit out, or maybe I'm playing back to back, and that's a whole other issue. But so let's say he plays 1 match and he sits out a match, and so they're in groups where they can split, and then he plays the second match. All right, so frequency is 1 day per week and 2 matches, and so he's in homeostasis. Doesn't mean blows off some steam, but not really loading his tissue to be a better pickleball player. So he needs to push it. And so he goes, you know what? I'm still, still crazy semester, still don't like MSK and neuro professors, and I need to get there and smash their heads a little bit more. So, or more frequently, but I can only do it 1 day per week. So I'm going to double my matches, which usually doubling stuff is usually not a good thing. But so he's going to still stay 1 day per week, but he's going to play 4 matches, which is going to take a lot of time. He's going to probably stress him out because he's not studying. So it may not be helping him. But 1 day per week, 4 matches. And that gets him pretty close. And that's where he's probably going to feel a bit more sore the next day. But he's going to be okay. He does, these are going to be some like sorenesses, some delayed onset muscle soreness, that kind of stuff. But, there's no true injury. But if he goes to 5 matches per week, or 5 matches the 1 day per week, that's now his magnitude problem. His frequency was static between 2, 4, and 5. It was just the magnitude of the matches that week, or that 1 time per week, that got him in trouble. So now you have a magnitude problem. So how you would address him is you would talk to him about, maybe you need to talk to your professors and all that other stuff. But from a straight pickleball standpoint would be, hey, let's decrease the number of matches you play. Maybe even drop them down. Maybe you only play 2 of them, but maybe you go 2 days per week or 3 days per week. And so you're not there. So you're probably, this amount of time would probably be similar to this amount of time. But of course you got to drive and all that kind of stuff. And so maybe he does that and he notices, hey, I'm doing good. I can definitely feel a difference. And then he pushes it and he goes to, he stays at 2 matches and he goes, I can even go 5 days per week. And so, after every class that he has, he goes and plays pickleball. And he definitely notices that this is a similar feeling to this, but he likes getting out and going more frequently. And so if these feel similar and your athlete is asking you which one to do, and you can say, well, you have a choice, right? You have a choice of, can you go 5 days per week or can you only go 1 day per week? And then you just got to know that you have a certain envelope that you can do on a magnitude level. But if he goes 7 days per week and he stays at the 2 matches, and that's now his frequency problem. So this is a frequency problem. Maybe he needs to bring it back down to here. And this is a magnitude problem, and maybe he needs to bring it back down into, he still can only go 1 day per week, but maybe it's 3 matches. Because maybe 4 matches, he had a lot of soreness, or maybe he just needs to adapt. So again, knowing, is it a frequency issue, kind of this micro trauma, repeated running type, repeated load type of thing, or is it is it jumping down off the box and it was a one-time, low frequency, but the magnitude was really high. So you got to lower the magnitude here, you got to decrease the frequency here. And then that's kind of the same combination. So, and now if somebody has an injury or surgery, so this is where your normal envelope was. So this is your homeostasis. This is your underload. This is where you got an overload, and above the red is where you got into excessive or injury. And I just kind of shaded them out. But now, as a result of injury or surgery, now what happens is this breaking point for excessive or injury now lowers. So it takes less frequency and less load to get into excessive overload or injury. And so because the tissue doesn't tolerate as much, the capacity of the tissue is lower. And so that goes lower, and as well as does your overload zone. So your overload zone went from here to here, from here to here. Now it dropped down to here to here. So things that were normally okay before are not going to be okay. So let's use some discrete examples, and I won't go through all of them. But now, so if remember before lifting the 40-pound calf, and you can kind of see the old one, remember that's kind of where he only did it 1 day per week, but that kind of got him close to, but he was still overloaded. He was still fine. Maybe he had some delayed onset muscle soreness, but now he has an injury because that same load that he used to do 1 day per week is now causing problems. And your patients are going to come in and say, you know what, I used to be able to lift a 40-pound calf 1 day per week. Like, why is it a problem now? And so this is where this comes into play is you got to tell them, well, your tissue, the capacity of your tissue used to be this, now it's this, and things that we could do up here are now an issue. So those are things that you're going to have to talk to your clients about. And like, you probably can't even lift, you can't even try to lift a 55-pound calf. So, and these are just other examples of now frequency types of issues, like even the lifting a 20-pound calf, you're even trying to go 2 days per week to maybe 3 is going to be a problem. So we're used to do it 1 day per week. So really, of all those issues of all those things that he did before, the only one that he can truly tolerate anymore at this point is lifting a the smallest calf just 1 time per week. And so like, he's going to go like, how am I going to get stronger? And so what you're going to say is, well, we're going to lift that one calf, but now we're going to try to go 1 day per week or maybe even twice per week. And let's say this is even, twice per week is over here. So now it might be lifting a 20-pound calf 1 day per week. And then the second time per week is we're going to lift a 10-pound calf, which would be down here. And so that, the mean of between those would be somewhere in here, which would still be in your safe zone. And so just another example of pickleball, and I won't go through all these, but this just kind of points out all these different examples where, and I'll kind of skip through those. So, but, so now playing pickleball, 2 matches per week, and if he does that twice a week, that's kind of getting too close to where he's in trouble, and doing 4 matches that one time is now definitely a problem. So again, it might be, hey, I still want you to play pickleball. I want you to go twice a week, 1 time of the week, your heavy day, when you feel the best, I want you to play 2 matches. The second time you go, I only want you to play 1 match. So 1 day per week, he's playing 2 matches. The second time per week, he's playing 1 match. We put him here. So the split of this would be like somewhere in here. Same kind of thing. And again, remember, it gets into magnitude, time, and direction. So is it a magnitude problem or is it a frequency problem? So now something to think about here is, now let's say somebody's wearing, has an injury and they're wearing a cam boot. And so now the load on, so let's say it's Achilles tendon problem. So now the load on the Achilles tendon is lowering. So the good idea is to decrease the stress on that tissue, but it takes, a lot of the stress off the tissue. I mean, you need a certain amount of stress on the tissue. And if the stress is completely gone, what that's going to do is decrease the capacity of that tissue. So if you got injured and the capacity was like somewhere up in here, it's going to drop as a result of wearing that boot. So you want, if possible, and if it's okay and it's not contraindicated, is to take them out of that boot every so often and have them do low load activities that keep them in, the safe zone, potentially up in here, and, maybe 1 pound or 1 time per week, two load of magnitude that they can tolerate that. And so some ways to kind of look at this, and like, how can you, and so like one thing I skipped across is, let's say you have a runner and like they're coming in for, some combination of a magnitude problem and or a frequency problem. And you can play this a couple different ways, but one way to decrease the load is to give them a brace, put them in a boot, like depends on what the tissue is, and address it that way. Another thing you can do, and there's all kinds of combinations of things you can do, and this is from Rich Riley's work, is you can increase the stride frequency, increase the cadence. If it's a runner, there are studies showing that if you simply increase their, like, what is an easy thing to do? I mean, do you want them, like, do you want to spend all your time teaching them how to run and talking about like all these tons of internal cues? Or do you simply want to say, I want you to run with an increased cadence? And so, because the reason that's helpful and good is because Rich did a study where he found all these different tissues. They, by increasing it, increasing the cadence by 10% decreases the strain on those tissues. So simply having the person turn over their legs quicker decreases the load on Achilles, glute, patellofemoral joint, like all these tissues. And he talks about in the article like how you can do this, but simply you can just like have somebody do a run, on their Apple Watch or Garmin watch. They can look at, okay, what is my cadence? I mean, there's other apps you can do all this kind of stuff and get your average cadence, and then just take that times 1.05 and or 1.10, and then that kind of gives you a target rate. It's not target heart rate. Sorry, that's a target cadence rate. Sorry, which is 5 to 10% above their natural pace. Saying so, you just increase that. Or there's a lot of songs that will have a certain frequency, and so sometimes you hear people wearing headphones, and which is probably not good if you're running on a road. But there are a lot of ways to increase stride cadence that are good because they decrease the load, the magnitude of the load on a person. So, and then just kind of this final slide here is some things to think about. Is if somebody's capacity drops as a result of an injury, like, what is their capacity now? What is their tolerance? Like, what is is it a load issue that they're now having after the injury? Is it a volume issue? Like, how do you know how to scale these? Like, how do you know how to scale this up or down? So if they are here, probably need to lower the magnitude. But if that's not enough, but they're like here, what I'm probably going to do is have them go twice a week. But the second time I do the load, it's not going to be here. It's probably going to be down here. Well, how do you know when too much is too much? You look at external cues, or look at, is the weight too heavy? Are they struggling to, can they not do the lift? Are they getting swelling and more soreness than normal? Are they losing range of motion? Let's say it's a knee. Is their knee now more painful than normal? Is it more stiff than normal? Are they losing motion? Are they having, is it more irritable where they used to be able to climb up 2 flights of stairs before it got sore? Now the front of their knee is more sore with just like 2 steps. Those are cues that you're probably over, maybe you're doing twice a week and you're up in here versus like down in here. Other internal cues, like how hard is it for them? What is their rating of perceived exertion? Are you giving them some kind of a 0 to 10 scale, like how rested do you feel, how recovered do you feel, and those types of things. So like these are things you want to monitor, because then it kind of gives you an idea of, hey, am I between here and here where I want to be, or am I up here? Or even, that's not good, and it's also not good to be down in underload. If things are too easy, they're not, they don't have some, if their RPE is, like a 3 all the time, that's not where you want to be either. So, all right, everybody. Hopefully this makes sense. Take care.